I never imagined something like this would happen to me. You hear about it, you see it in movies, but you never think it's going to be you. You don't think your world will come crashing down around you in an instant. But that's exactly what happened to me one night. I'm John, and I've been married to Jessica for 8 years. We met when we were both in our mid-20s, both ambitious, both excited about life and what the future held. Our marriage had its ups and downs, like any relationship, but I always thought we had something solid. We lived in a beautiful luxury apartment complex in downtown, a place I was proud of. We had the kind of life that others envied: stable jobs, the latest gadgets, vacations every year, a nice social circle. Things were good. At least, that's what I thought. Lately, though, something felt off. Jessica had started acting distant. It wasn't anything overt at first. It was just little things. She would come home late from work, claiming that her meetings ran long. She stopped being as affectionate with me, and when I asked her about it, she would brush it off, tell me I was being paranoid, that she was just tired. But I wasn't stupid. I could tell when something was wrong. I'd try to spend quality time with her, but she always had an excuse. The longer this went on, the more isolated I felt. I knew Jessica had a demanding job in marketing, but this new behavior, this new coldness, seemed like more than just stress from work. I had started to wonder if she was losing interest in me, maybe even in our relationship, but I didn't have any evidence to go off of. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I convinced myself I was overthinking things, that I needed to trust her and not let my insecurities get the best of me. After all, we had built a life together. But my gut kept nagging me, whispering that something wasn't right. That's when the power outage happened. It was a Thursday night, and we had just finished dinner. The weather had been fine all day, but suddenly, the lights flickered, and before we knew it, the entire building went dark. It wasn't just our apartment, it was the whole complex. At first, I thought it was a minor thing. The building was known for being high-end, and power outages weren't exactly rare in old buildings like ours. We had experienced it before, but never for more than a few minutes. I assumed the backup generators would kick in and the lights would come back on soon. But this time, they didn't. After a few minutes of silence, Jessica seemed unusually tense. She got up, excused herself, and said she was going to check on something. The tension in the air was palpable, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off. I went to the living room, trying to calm myself. The city outside our window was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps and the faint glow of emergency lights in the hallways. My mind was racing, but I told myself to relax. Maybe she was just stressed, maybe the outage had made her nervous. Still, as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. I tried calling her phone to see if she was okay, but there was no answer. It wasn't like her to leave her phone behind. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my mind spinning, when I finally heard the sound of voices in the hallway. It was quiet at first, but as I strained to listen, I realized it wasn't just Jessica's voice. There was another voice, a man's voice. The strange thing was that it didn't sound like a neighbor or someone she was talking to by accident. This was a conversation too intimate, too comfortable for a random encounter. I was confused, to say the least. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of something personal, something private, and I felt an overwhelming urge to go out and check. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and made my way to the door. The voices grew louder as I approached the hallway. I was frozen for a moment, standing on the edge of something I wasn't prepared for, unsure of whether I wanted to know what was really going on. But I couldn't ignore it. I pushed open the door just slightly and peeked through the crack. What I saw next made my stomach drop into my feet. Jessica was standing in the hallway laughing with a man. It wasn't just some casual chat, there was a familiarity between them that made my blood run cold. He was standing way too close to her. I could see his hand resting on her shoulder, a touch that felt wrong, especially considering the distance Jessica had kept from me lately. The way they looked at each other, the ease in their gestures, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a friendly conversation. Something was happening, something I wasn't supposed to see, but there it was, in front of me. I tried to steady myself, to breathe, but my world felt like it was crumbling. The reality of it hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a casual chat with a colleague or a friend. This was an affair, plain and simple. And at that moment, I knew everything I had feared was true. I stood there, unable to move, my mind racing, heart pounding in my chest. What was I supposed to do? What could I say? The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else, was in the arms of a stranger. Everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, was now laid bare in front of me. The trust, the love, the life we had built, it was all a lie. The minutes following the discovery of Jessica and the stranger in the hallway felt like they were stretching into an eternity. I was frozen, my hand still on the door handle, too shocked to do anything but stand there, barely able to process what I had just witnessed. My mind was screaming at me to do something, to say something, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if I was trapped in a surreal moment where the world had tilted sideways and nothing felt real anymore. Everything I thought I knew about our life, about our marriage, was suddenly in question. The sound of Jessica's laughter, her voice full of familiarity and ease as she stood so close to this man, was a harsh contrast to the tension that had been building between us for months. She had distanced herself from me in ways that I couldn't quite understand, making excuses for why she was always busy or preoccupied, and now this. This wasn't just some casual work colleague or old friend. There was an intimacy between them that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the physical proximity, it was the ease in which they interacted, the way they exchanged smiles, and the comfort with which he touched her shoulder. All of it screamed that this was something more, something that I wasn't part of, something that had been happening behind my back. I quietly backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest, the overwhelming need to confront her warring with the paralyzing fear that I wasn't ready for the truth. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly. What should I do now? Should I walk out there and demand answers? Should I confront her in the hallway, expose everything right then and there? But as I turned toward the living room, the weight of the situation hit me fully. I realized that I had already been living in the dark for months, convincing myself that the problems in our marriage were just temporary, just stress, just life. But in that moment, it became brutally clear that Jessica had already checked out, that whatever we had was no longer real. She had made a choice, and I wasn't part of it. The betrayal stung like 1,000 knives, each one digging deeper into my chest as I thought about all the small signs I had missed, the late nights, the evasive answers, the detachment. I had ignored them, hoping it was just a phase, hoping I was being overly sensitive. But now, seeing her with him, hearing the way they talked, the way they acted, it was impossible to deny. I finally moved, my legs shaking beneath me, my mind racing. I needed to know more. I needed confirmation because in some twisted part of me, I still couldn't fully accept that this was real. I couldn't believe that the woman I had been building a life with was betraying me so openly, so casually. I couldn't believe that she had been carrying on this secret while I had been none the wiser, pouring all my efforts into trying to fix something I didn't even know needed fixing. I took a deep breath and walked to the window, pulling the blinds just enough to peek through. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. There, in the dim light of the hallway, they were still standing close together, talking, laughing, and exchanging looks that said everything. Jessica's back was to me, but I could still see the way her body was angled toward him, the way she seemed to lose herself in the conversation, in the connection with this man who wasn't me. She had never looked at me like that in months, maybe even longer. There was a spark in her eyes when she looked at him, something that was so unmistakably different from the indifference I had become accustomed to. I felt sick. I felt like I was suffocating. The air in the apartment was thick, heavy with the weight of the truth I wasn't ready to face. I had been foolish, had been so wrapped up in trying to maintain the image of a perfect life, a perfect marriage, that I had ignored the warning signs that were all around me. But now they were all there, laid out in front of me, impossible to ignore. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she spent with him instead of with me? How many lies had I been fed? How many times had she brushed me off or made excuses to cover up what was really happening? I didn't know, and I didn't know if I wanted to know. The pain of this discovery felt suffocating, as though the room itself had closed in on me, trapping me in this moment of loss and betrayal. But as much as I wanted to run, to escape this awful reality, I knew I couldn't. I had to face it. I had to find a way to confront Jessica, to find out the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I couldn't stay in this limbo, pretending everything was fine. I had to know. I had to hear it from her. The silence of the apartment was suffocating as I made my decision. I would confront her. I would get the truth, no matter what it cost. I would not be left in the dark anymore, unable to see the person I had trusted for so long. I was going to face the betrayal head-on, even if it meant losing everything. I had already lost it all anyway. It was time to find out how deep this went. The decision to confront Jessica didn't come easily. For what felt like hours, I paced around the apartment, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, anger, betrayal, confusion, and a sickening sense of dread. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. But now I had to face her, to look her in the eye and hear the truth directly from her lips. I couldn't put it off any longer, no matter how much I wanted to run away from the pain that was now pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The betrayal was in front of me, and I needed to hear her admit it. I finally found the courage to walk down the hallway toward the bedroom where Jessica was. The apartment was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing, which felt heavy and ragged. I felt like a stranger in my own home, unsure of what would come next, of how this conversation would unfold. Would she deny it? Would she try to cover it up, lie her way through it like she had so many times before? Or would she finally be honest, finally own up to the secret she had been hiding from me for who knows how long? When I entered the bedroom, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her clothes from earlier. Her phone was in her hand and her eyes were focused on it, though she didn't seem to be reading anything. The room was dim, with just a sliver of light coming through the curtains, and in that moment, everything felt off. The distance between us, the unspoken words, the tension in the air, it all hit me at once. This wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't the person I thought she was. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, before I finally spoke. "Jessica," I said, my voice coming out tighter than I wanted it to. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, but the way she shifted in her seat told me she knew what was coming. She set her phone down on the bed and straightened her posture, her eyes flicking briefly toward the door as if considering an escape. But there was nowhere to go. There was no pretending anymore. I didn't waste time beating around the bush. I couldn't. The truth was already out in the open, and I wasn't going to let her hide from it any longer. "I saw you with him. I heard you talking to him in the hallway," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I saw the way you looked at him. The way you touched him. Don't lie to me, Jessica. I know what's been going on." The silence that followed was suffocating. She didn't speak. She didn't even move. She just sat there, her face still, her eyes avoiding mine. The room felt impossibly small, like the walls were closing in on us. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, threatening to spill over, but I held it back. I needed answers. I needed the truth. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "You're being dramatic, Greg," she said, her voice cold and dismissive. "It's not what you think." I could feel my chest tightening at her words. How many times had I heard this? How many times had she dismissed my concerns, made me feel like I was overreacting, like I was imagining things? How many times had she lied to me, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was something deliberate, something planned. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm not stupid, Jessica," I said, my voice shaking now, not from fear but from the weight of the betrayal that I could no longer ignore. "I've seen the way you've been acting. The late nights, the excuses, the phone calls. And then there's him standing in our hallway in our apartment, touching you like you're his." She seemed to flinch at that, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're talking about," she shot back, the defensiveness in her voice only confirming my suspicions. "Tom is just a friend. We've been working together for months, and you know that. I don't know why you're making this into something it's not." I could feel the anger rising in me, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I had seen enough, that I wasn't going to stand here and let her lie to me anymore. But I needed to hear it from her. I needed her to admit what she had been hiding. "Then why didn't you tell me about him?" I demanded. "Why didn't you tell me he was so close to you? Why are you sneaking around, hiding things from me?" She looked away from me, her gaze dropping to the floor, and for a moment I thought she might actually crack, might finally break down and tell me the truth. But instead, she just shrugged. "It's complicated, Greg. You wouldn't understand." That was the moment I realized there was no point in trying to get her to explain herself. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't going to admit anything. This was beyond saving. The tears that had been threatening to spill out since the moment I saw them together were now on the edge of my control, but I refused to cry. I refused to let her see how much she had hurt me. I had been weak for too long, too blinded by my own love for her to see what was really going on. "I don't need you to explain it to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've already seen enough. It's over, Jessica." She didn't say anything else. She just stared at me, her face blank, as if the words didn't matter anymore, as if this was just another argument to her, another fight she could brush off. But it wasn't just another argument. It was the end. The end of our marriage, the end of everything I thought we had. And in that moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the hurt, the betrayal, finally settled in. In the days that followed the confrontation, everything felt like it was unraveling. I had said the words that I thought I'd never say, that I never imagined I would have to say. "It's over, Jessica." And yet, even as the words left my mouth, there was a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't a moment of clarity. It was more like a crushing weight, one that pressed down on me, making everything feel heavy and unmanageable. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was no longer the person I thought she was. And the life I had spent years building was shattered in a matter of moments. I kept going over the conversation in my head, trying to find the right words I should have said, trying to understand how it had all come to this. But there were no right words. There was no perfect explanation. There was just the raw, gut-wrenching pain of realizing that the person I had shared everything with had betrayed me in the most fundamental way. I tried to keep my emotions in check, to not let the anger, the sadness, or the overwhelming sense of betrayal consume me, but it was impossible. I found myself lashing out at the smallest things, things that never used to bother me, things that in any other context would have seemed trivial. But every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had lied to me, who had erased me from the picture of her life without a second thought. She had been having an affair, and everything she had said to me before, every excuse she had given, every reassurance she had offered, now seemed like a cruel joke. The lies felt like a slap in the face, each one more humiliating than the last. She had made excuses about work, about being tired, about needing space. She had convinced me to believe that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting, when in reality she had already checked out of our marriage. The silence between us in the days following the confrontation was suffocating. Jessica didn't try to apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't offer any explanation that made sense. It was as if she had already moved on, as if she had been emotionally distant for so long that the emotional toll of the affair had become insignificant. That was what hurt the most. The indifference. The coldness. She acted like I was the one who was unreasonable for feeling betrayed, for being hurt, for wanting answers. It was as if the bond we had spent years nurturing meant nothing to her. The woman I had once been able to talk to, the woman I had trusted with my deepest feelings, was now a stranger. I wanted to scream at her, to make her see what she had done to me, to make her feel the weight of her actions. But what was the point? She had already dismissed me, already justified her actions to herself. She wasn't the person I thought she was, and I wasn't the man I thought I was either. I had been so blinded by my love for her that I had allowed myself to be manipulated. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself everything would work itself out, and now I was paying the price. The emotional toll of it all was exhausting. I spent my days trying to find some semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, into anything that would take my mind off of the deep, gnawing pain that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I would go to the gym, meet up with friends, anything to distract myself from the constant knot in my stomach, from the thoughts that ran on a loop in my mind. But nothing worked. I could feel the weight of it all. The betrayal hung over me like a cloud, casting a shadow on every part of my life. The man I had been before all of this, the man who had trusted and loved freely, seemed like a distant memory. How could I go back to that man? How could I return to the life I had built with someone who had discarded me so easily? Jack, my son, was the only thing that kept me going. I didn't want him to see me like this, broken and lost. I didn't want him to feel the tension in the house, to know that something had shifted between his mother and me. He deserved better than that. But there were moments when he would ask about her, about why she wasn't around as much, and I found myself struggling to answer. How could I explain this to him? How could I explain that the woman I had promised to love and care for had chosen someone else over our family? I didn't have the words for it. So, I stayed silent, trying to protect him from the reality that I wasn't sure how to deal with myself. The sadness was the hardest part to bear. The anger eventually faded, replaced by a hollow emptiness that seemed to echo in every room of our apartment. I couldn't bring myself to face Jessica fully anymore. I could barely look at her without seeing everything that had been lost, without seeing the years of trust that she had thrown away. The love I had once felt for her was gone, replaced by a deep sorrow that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that I had been living a lie for so long. I had invested everything into this marriage, convinced myself that we would grow old together, that we would weather life's challenges side by side. And now, all of that had been swept away, leaving me standing in the wreckage, unsure of who I was without her. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in this relationship any longer. As much as it hurt to admit it, as much as I didn't want to face the reality of it all, I knew that there was no going back. The trust had been broken, the bond shattered, and I wasn't sure if I could ever see her the same way again. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the way she had treated me, the way she had shut me out, the way she had lied to my face. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let her continue to make me feel small, insignificant, like I was the one who had somehow failed. I had to make a decision. I had to choose myself, even if it meant walking away from the life I had spent years building. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. But deep down, I knew it was the only choice I could make. I had to find a way to heal, to move on, to reclaim the parts of me that I had lost along the way. For my own sake, for Jack's sake, and, most importantly, for the sake of the man I wanted to be. The decision to move forward was an agonizing one. But as the days passed, it became more and more clear that staying in this marriage was no longer an option. I had spent so much time denying the reality of what had been happening, convincing myself that we could fix things, that the love we had once shared could be salvaged. But the truth, as painful as it was, could not be ignored any longer. The affair, the lies, the emotional distance. It had all been building for months, maybe even longer, and I had been too blinded by my own hopes to see it. But now, after everything had been laid bare, I knew that staying in this toxic, broken relationship was not an option. As much as it hurt, as much as I didn't want to believe it, I realized that the only way forward was to let go. There was no point in pretending anymore. It wasn't just the affair. It was the years of emotional neglect, the constant feeling of being unseen and unimportant, the way Jessica had treated me like an afterthought. I had been giving everything I had to this marriage, trying to be the husband she wanted, trying to be the man who could make things better, but nothing I did seemed to make a difference. She had already moved on, and it wasn't just from Tom. It was from me. It was from everything we had built together. The woman I had married had vanished, and in her place was someone who had chosen someone else, someone who had chosen a life of deceit over the life we had planned. I knew I had to take action. I had to be the one to make the first move, to take control of my life again. The emotional toll of the past few weeks had been overwhelming. I felt like a shell of the person I used to be, like I had been drained of everything that once made me whole. But I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I had spent so much of my time focusing on Sarah's actions, on her choices, but now it was time to turn inward. I had to focus on myself, on finding a way to rebuild, to rediscover who I was outside of this marriage, outside of this woman who had taken so much from me. I was worth more than the scraps she had left me. The hardest part of it all was figuring out how to move forward. The practical aspects were one thing, filing for divorce, dividing assets, figuring out what would happen with Jack, but the emotional side was another beast entirely. How do you move forward when the person you thought you would spend the rest of your life with has betrayed you so completely? How do you trust again when the foundation of everything you thought you knew has been ripped apart? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I couldn't stay in the same place, wallowing in this pain, wallowing in the hurt that had already consumed me for too long. I knew that I had to find a way to heal, to let go of the anger and the betrayal and focus on building something new. It wasn't going to happen overnight. Healing takes time. But the first step was to make a choice. And I had chosen myself. I sat down with Jessica that evening, the night before I planned to file for divorce. I knew she would put up a fight. I knew she would try to convince me to reconsider, that maybe we could work things out, that this was all a mistake. But deep down I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her back into my life. I wasn't going to allow her to manipulate me into staying in a marriage that had long since lost its meaning. When I told her that I was filing for divorce, the look on her face was one of complete shock. She seemed genuinely surprised, as though she hadn't expected this from me. But I wasn't surprised by her reaction. She had never truly cared about my feelings. She had never truly cared about us. The woman I had spent years loving was gone, and all I was left with was the ghost of a relationship that had already died. Her response was predictable: anger, guilt, denial. She tried to convince me that we could work through it, that the affair was a mistake, that everything could go back to the way it was. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard these excuses before. I had heard her blame everything from stress to my supposed lack of attention. But the truth was, it was never about me. It was about her choices. It was about her finding someone else to turn to, someone else who made her feel seen and wanted. I wasn't the one who had betrayed us. I wasn't the one who had checked out of our marriage. The pain of the entire situation was overwhelming, but I knew I had to follow through with this decision. I couldn't live in the shadow of this betrayal. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I was taking control of my life again, and while that didn't make the pain go away, it was a step in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, I focused on getting the divorce finalized. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, friends, family, and most importantly, Jack. He had become my anchor through all of this. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the sadness that lingered there whenever he asked why his mother wasn't around. I hated having to explain, but I did my best to shield him from the worst of it. I wanted him to grow up knowing that even though things were falling apart, he was loved beyond measure. I wanted him to understand that despite the pain, we would be okay. I would make sure of that. As for Sarah, I stopped reaching out. I stopped caring about what she thought or whether she felt guilty about everything she had done. I realized that my healing was my responsibility and I wasn't going to let her hold the key to that anymore. The process was long and painful, but it was the only path forward. And though I didn't have all the answers, I knew one thing for sure: I had made the right choice. It was time for me to heal, time for me to rebuild, and most importantly, time for me to find peace. What I've learned from all of this is that sometimes things have to fall apart in order to build something stronger. Love is not enough when trust is broken. You can't fix something that has already been shattered no matter how much you want to. But you can rebuild. And that's exactly what I'm doing. It's been months since I made the decision to end my marriage, and while the wounds are still there, they're no longer as sharp as they once were. The process of healing, of rebuilding, has been slow and challenging, but I can finally say that I am moving forward. The road hasn't been easy. There have been days when I've felt completely lost, days when I've questioned whether I made the right choice, days when the grief of it all has overwhelmed me. But then there are other days when I wake up and realize that, despite everything, I've made it through. I've survived. And I'm starting to believe that I can be happy again, that there's still a future for me beyond the pain I've endured. When I first filed for divorce, it felt like my world had shattered into a million pieces. I had lost the woman I thought I would spend my life with, the life we had built together, and the family I thought we would be. The sense of betrayal was suffocating, and for a while it felt like I was walking through life in a fog, unable to see the way forward. But as time has passed, I've realized that I'm not broken. I'm not the same person I was when all of this began, but I'm learning to be someone better. Someone stronger. Someone who understands that love, while important, isn't the only thing that holds a marriage together. Trust, respect, and communication are just as essential, and when those things are gone, love isn't enough to sustain a relationship. Jack has been my anchor through all of this. As hard as it has been to explain things to him, as much as I wish he didn't have to go through this, I've come to realize that his presence in my life has been a constant reminder that there is still so much to be grateful for. He's the one person who truly needs me, the one person who reminds me every day that there's still love, still hope, even in the darkest of times. I've become more present for him, more focused on being the father he deserves, and in doing so, I've found a sense of purpose again. Through him, I've learned that healing is not just about moving on from the pain, but about finding new ways to grow, to love, and to be the person I want to be. It hasn't been easy. There are moments when I miss the life I had, when I miss the woman I thought I knew. There are times when the anger and hurt still creep back in, when I wonder how she could have done this to me, how she could have so easily walked away from everything we had. I still have moments of sadness, moments when I'm reminded of the dreams we shared, of the future we were supposed to have. But I've come to realize that those moments don't define me. I am not defined by the pain she caused, nor am I defined by the life we lost. I am defined by the choices I make from here on out. I am defined by my resilience, by my ability to move forward despite the setbacks, by my ability to choose myself even when it feels like everything has been taken from me. As for Jessica, I've come to terms with the fact that I may never fully understand why she did what she did. I may never get the closure I wanted or the answers that would make everything make sense. But I've stopped looking for them. I've stopped needing her to explain herself or apologize. I've learned that some things are simply beyond my control and that the only thing I can control is how I respond. I don't need her to validate my feelings anymore. I don't need her to acknowledge the hurt she caused. I've learned to let go of the bitterness, to release the anger that I had carried for so long. It hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. Holding on to those emotions only kept me tethered to a past that no longer serves me. In the end, what I've learned from all of this is that life doesn't always go as planned. You can't always control the outcomes, no matter how hard you try. But what you can control is your own journey, your own healing, and your own future. No matter how much I thought I needed Jessica, the truth is I am enough on my own. I am worthy of love, of respect, and of a future that is free from the pain of betrayal. I've learned that sometimes the hardest things are the things that teach you the most about yourself. Sometimes you have to lose everything in order to realize what really matters. If I could offer any advice to others going through something similar, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't let fear or insecurity keep you in a situation that isn't healthy. You are deserving of love, of trust, and of a relationship that makes you feel whole, not one that leaves you questioning your worth. And when the time comes to let go, when the truth is undeniable, know that it's okay to walk away. It's okay to choose yourself. You will heal. You will grow. And you will find peace again. I don't know what the future holds for me, but for the first time in months, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for the person I am becoming, for the life that I'm building. The past is behind me, and while the scars will always remain, they're not as deep as they once were. I'm stronger now. And that, more than anything, is something I can hold onto as I move forward.